Paul.
Hello, everyone, again. I'm here to introduce Blanca Lopez, who will be speaking to us about Project Alliance. And she's been working closely on this with the county executive and has been kind enough to keep us informed. And when everyone introduced themselves, the two things that I noticed were, one, we were from all over the county. So, and this is really a county effort that's underway. And for Blanca to tell us about it is right on target, I think. And two, most of the people here are active in lobbying for advancements in these areas. And if Blanca, if you can tell us what to do, we're ready, willing, and able. So please fill us in on what's going on with Project Alliance and give us some guidance.
Sure, thank you. It's my pleasure, Mr. Davis. Thanks for the invitation again. The last time I was here, it was probably October, maybe, or September, where I kind of talked and I gave a little more of a background of what Project Alliance is and the 5 components that make up PA. And just as a brief intro to those of you who were not present when I did my first presentation, Project Alliance came to be in response to one particular recommendation of the police, the Reimagining Police Task Force that was created under the county executive George Latimer and co-chaired by my colleagues, Mayo, Bartlett, and Leroy, Frazier, in response to Executive Order 203 that was then a mandate that was handed down to us by then Governor Cuomo. The one main recommendation focused on how to answer, how to respond to mental health calls. And in order to do that, what we decided to do was through the guidance of our Director of Operations for Westchester County, Joan McDonald, she convened a working group made up of the commissioners from the Department of Emergency Services, Department of Community Mental Health, Department of Public Safety, Department of Social Services, and myself representing the County Executive's Office to develop and strategize a comprehensive response to that particular recommendation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you an update as to where we are with the 5 different components of Project Alliance, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions afterwards or whenever it is that your agenda indicates for me to do that. So as I had mentioned, there are 5 main components that make up Project Alliance. The first one has to do with 911 diversion training. The goal of this particular component was to get as many desk officers, dispatchers trained in 911 diversion. And what we decided to do was, our first goal was to make sure that we had all of our county employees, those that work at 60 Control, which is emergency services, and those that work at public safety, that they would all be trained in this particular training that was done with the cooperation of People USA, as well as thanks to funding from the state that we received. So qualified callers that would call and would get connected to the crisis team that is located at St. Vincent's Hospital. And so far we have had 250, and the trainings began in late summer. So since then, we've had 251 dispatchers and desk officers countywide that have been trained. And we have 23 of the 49 PSAPs, which are public safety access points, that have participated so far. PSAPs could be whether it's state police, whether it's your local police department, whether it's 60 Control, whichever entity that answers any type of 911 calls, whether you're calling from a landline or a cell phone. Right now, we're actually strategizing on how to get the remaining PSAPs to participate in our training. Our training is given free of charge. And what we are doing now is, as we strategize how to do outreach for the PSAPs that haven't participated yet, we are continuing to provide training for specific police departments. So our Department of Community Mental Health has received requests from, for example, the New Rochelle Police Department, the Portchester Police Department, Mount Kisco, which is our public safety department that operates as the local police for the village of Mount Kisco. They're getting specific training on 911 diversion. The second component has to do with the enhanced behavioral health line. And this is strongly tied to 911 diversion, because what happens is when a caller is identified as or a call is identified as a behavioral health call, it is then sent to the enhanced behavioral health line that is managed by St. Vincent's, by their crisis team. So what we did was the county added additional funding in this year's operating budget to operate this line 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in order to pick up these mental health crisis calls. And this later on in the year, in July of this year, it will also tie into the state suicide hotline, which is 988. That will be the live line that will launch in the summer of this year. Right now, it operates as a local call. It's 914-925-5959. So anybody who's in crisis can call that line. The goal is for somebody who calls that line will then be, their call will be answered by the crisis team, who will then link up to the local mobile crisis health behavioral health teams that I will talk about shortly, which has to do with the 8 different locations throughout the county, representing 8 different catchment areas. So as you can see, all of these components kind of build on one another, because again, the goal is to have a comprehensive approach and a comprehensive response to addressing mental health calls. The other component that is part of Project Alliance has to do with providing enhanced training for EMS personnel. We know that it is important for EMT and EMS personnel to be trained in behavioral health crisis situations, so that EMS personnel are using the same language as police officers or health practitioners in order for the person that is being served to have the best outcome, and so that each entity is communicating using the same language. We are starting the training for this particular group from March 7th through March 11th. And we're working closely. This was training that was identified with the help of Commissioner Wishney from the Department of Emergency Services. And again, it was a need that we identified, knowing very well that EMS is also responds to these types of calls. And it is important for all of the entities that are responding to make sure that they are in the same, have received the same training and are addressing these calls or these situations using the same approach. The fourth component has to do with crisis intervention training. So CITs, as it's familiar, it's known for the most part, it can be a little, or it may have a misnomer, because CIT sometimes refers to crisis intervention training, which every police officer, whether it's a recruit and they're going through the academy and they're getting their crisis intervention training, or if they're a seasoned officer and they're getting in-service training, they are receiving. However, there's an additional component that's referred to as CIT training, which is crisis intervention team training, which not every police officer receives. But the goal of the CIT team, the crisis intervention team training, is the first step in order for let's say a particular police officer from a particular police department to receive the CIT training in order to be part of a mental health response team. And what we've seen is that over the years, yes, we've had many recruits and many in-service officers who have received the CIT training to de-escalate, to address situations in crisis. But when it comes to certain officers who have received training to be a part or to work alongside or within a behavioral health response team, we weren't seeing enough teams being created. So the goal for this particular component was actually twofold. One, to make sure that the CIT training in terms of your traditional crisis intervention training, not just focused on recruits, but also police officers who have been in service for a long period of time and who needed additional refreshers and to attend these types of trainings more often. But number two is to make sure that if a police department was going to send a particular police officer who should not necessarily be a recruit, it should be somebody who's seasoned to be a part of a response team, we want to make sure that these teams develop. And in order to do that, the county itself, with the participation of the Department of Community Mental Health, Department of Social Services, Public Safety, Emergency Services, are in the process of putting together a crisis intervention team steering committee in order to provide technical assistance to those local police departments that would like to create their own mental health response teams. So that particular component has two specific goals, but it's important to differentiate between the crisis intervention training that every recruit and every some in-service officers may take, but then there's also the crisis intervention team training that is specific to one or two police officers who will then become part of a mental health response team for that particular community that they work in. And last but not least is like what we consider, and I personally consider, the most important recommendation and component of Project Alliance, which is the creation of the mobile crisis response teams. Last time that I was here and I reported to all of you, I informed you that there would be, we had identified 8 sites throughout the county. And these 8 sites or the locations where these teams would be housed at would be in Portchester, the city of Yonkers, Mount Vernon, the Greenberg, White Plains, Peekskill, Mount Kisco, New Rochelle, and Ossining. Since then, we have already identified the nonprofit organizations that will be running the behavioral health teams. So for Portchester, you have Family Services of Westchester, who will be working, and they will co-locate with the local police department to address any calls that would come to them. For young, and after I explain which nonprofit is linked to a particular site, I'll also go into the catchment areas that would respond to or would be part of the Portchester location. So for Yonkers, it would be People USA. For the city of Mount Vernon is the Guidance Center. For Greenberg, White Plains, it's Mental Health Association. For the city of Peekskill is WJCS. For Mount Kisco is the Mental Health Association. For New Rochelle is the Guidance Center. And for Ossining, it's Family Services of Westchester. Now, all of these organizations that have been identified, we are finalizing contracts. I believe all of the police departments, as well as the nonprofit and the county through our Department of Community Mental Health, have finalized all of their contracts. We're in the process of also collecting memorandum of understandings with the other police departments that belong, or communities that belong to these specific 8 catchment areas, because we want to make sure that everybody knows what their roles and expectations are of all of these entities. These nonprofits are also have started hiring. They've hired team leaders. Each team is made up of 8 people. So there was some hiring that needed to be done. DCMH is also looking at sustainability, because while this right now, as all of you know, is being funded through the county, we had invested about a little more than $6 million. And in addition to that, we had some federal funding that will last us for the next couple of years. Time flies by. So what will happen, in the next administration? What if there isn't any county or tax levy funding dedicated to this? So DCMH, under the leadership of Commissioner Orth, has been very proactive in looking at additional funding sources in order to sustain these teams. The goal for all of these 5 components is really for people in crisis to have direct access to mental health services. Just like you would if your house is on fire, you would call the fire department. If you are a victim of a crime, you would call the police department. If you hurt yourself, EMS would respond. But if you're having or experiencing a behavioral health crisis, now there is a direct link to a mental health provider that can come and assist you 24/7, 365 days a year. And now just going back to the makeup of these 8 catchment areas, I'll be happy to follow up, Nada, and send you the breakdown of these catchment areas. But if time permits, I just want to go over what other communities are part of the catchment areas, if that's okay. So for the village of Mount Kisco, as I had mentioned, the agency that was identified to co-locate along with Mount Kisco Police, which is the Westchester County Public Safety Department, it's MHA, and the police agencies in this catchment area would be the New York State Police, Bedford Hills Police, Newcastle, North Castle, Somers, Pound Ridge, North Salem, and Lewisboro. Going into the Greenberg White Plains catchment area, the agency, as I had mentioned, was the Mental Health Association, and the police agencies in this area are Elmsford, Ardsley, Tarrytown, Irvington, Dobbs Ferry, and Hastings on Hudson. Moving on to Ossining, Family Services of Westchester is the agency that will be working there. And the agencies in this area are Mount Pleasant, Pleasantville, Sleepy Hollow, and Briarcliff Manor. And for Port Chester, the agency is Family Services of Westchester, and the catchment area is the City of Rye Police, Rye Brook, Harrison, Village of Mamaroneck, Town of Mamaroneck, Larchmont, and SUNY Purchase Police as well. The Yonkers does not have a catchment area because it's a city, it's big. They already have their own behavioral health team. So what we are providing is an enhancement to the team and certainly provide some modifications to their current structure in terms of addressing behavioral health calls. And the agency that is working in Yonkers is People USA. And for the city of Mount Vernon, the agent, as well as in New Rochelle, the agency that will be working in both cities would be the Guidance Center. And for Mount Vernon's catchment area, it's made up of Pelham, Bronxville, and Tuckahoe. And for New Rochelle, it's Eastchester and Scarsdale. And last but not least, we have Peekskill up north. WJCS is the agency selected, and the Croton-on-Hudson and Westchester County Police and New York State Police are part of the catchment areas for Peekskill. And that is, those are all my updates for Project Alliance. Nada, I'm happy to answer any questions, or I'll be more than happy to wait until the end.
I have several questions, but I think let's open it up to the group and see what they have to say and ask questions to our speaker. Ton, you're muted, Ton.
I'm sorry. For Blanca, about Peekskill, you mentioned the state police and the county police. but what about the Peekskill City or Village Police?
Well, the team is located in the city of Peekskill in the police department. So that's where the actual location of the mental health response team is. So the
Okay.
cities and the communities I listed that are paired up with the agencies are where the teams reside to
Okay.
support the catchment area.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Terry has her hand up, Paul.
I'm sorry.
Thank
Who
you.
does?
Terry, the little hand in the corner. Thank
I
you.
see.
I just had, I'm relatively new on the Police Advisory Committee in Croton. And one of the concerns that was raised was when suicide is mentioned, but there's not a cogent plan, the police are directed to refer the call to the mental health team at St. Vincent's. And in light of the fact that there aren't crisis response teams in action yet that can respond, there's sometimes a feeling, I'm wondering how the loop is closed, because the police sometimes feel that, there is always a possibility of self-harm or other harm. And when they do dispatch over to the crisis intervention, the team, how do they know, how it's being handled? How is the loop closed?
Well, that's where the 911 diversion training kicks in. And that is why it's imperative that every police department is trained under 911 diversion, because it starts with whether it's a cell phone that, that the local Croton Police Department, whoever the desk officer is or whatnot, answers that call. They need to be trained to identify if it's a mental health crisis call or not. And if it is, that is where that warm handoff goes into right now, what is the crisis response team at St. Vincent's. But eventually, come mid-March to late March, once these teams are fully operating, it will go to the mental health crisis response team that is operating or covering Cortland's area.
But that's sort of the front end of it. My question was the back end of it. After they divert the call, how is closure achieved? How does the police department know how the call was handled? Is it a warm transfer? I think there was some concern of our chief that, you sort of hand it off and then you're not necessarily in the loop and you don't know how things are being resolved. So I'm wondering how the back end works after the call is diverted.
There are two main things. There's that universal records access system that is in the works, but it's also having those meetings with all the police departments. I don't know how often these meetings will be, but there has to be a communication system between the mental health response team and the police department where they are, or the community where that police department is and where they're responding to make sure that that particular issue is being, whether they need benefits from DSS or they need housing or they need to find a bed at a hospital for respite or whatever the case may be, there is a plan in place to make sure that those situations are being followed up. So in case there's a call again next week, they know what the history is, they know who responded and or what additional support is needed.
I'm sorry, I'll just try to be more specific one time and then I'll leave it. So I'm a dispatcher. Someone calls me in crisis. I'm with that person on the phone. I'm trained, so I appropriately divert. I hang up the phone and I'm freaking because someone is in a crisis and now I just passed it off to someone else. How is the loop immediately? Like, is the police called back by the St. Vincent's team? Our police department felt a little unsure. Do we send a car anyway? How do we know that particular call in the moment is being handled?
The police department, if the call is in Cortland, they are still responding to that call. However, the action is not being initiated by the police department. It's being initiated by the mental health response team. So as the police department, as a Cortland Police Department or a car is going to that particular home or whatever the call is coming from, the mental health, the behavioral health crisis team is responding to that as well. So the local representative of whoever the police officers assign knows what is going on. They're just not taking action because they're standing back, because this is a type of call where it's best suited for a team of behavioral health experts to respond to instead of a police officer. I hope that answered your question.
Kathy.
But they're present at every situation. It's just that they're not taking action because that is not what this situation calls for.
Kathy, you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's fantastic. And for the tremendous work you all have done. I'm blown away. It's really, it's like we were wishing for this and you made it happen. And I'm just so impressed, Blanca. My question is, how are illegal drugs and contraband and that sort of thing handled in these kinds of situations? You know, one of the concerns I've had with this concept is that perhaps people will, you know, who are, if there's not an overdose, which is a medical emergency, but in case that there's some kind of situation where there are drugs involved or contraband and people will hesitate to reach out, or they'll end up, you know, in legal jeopardy. And so I'm curious as to how that all gets hashed out, and how that decisions are made about those things.
Those decisions are way over my ability to comment on that. I would have to refer to DCMH and the police departments involved in that particular stage. I don't know what the policy is with respect to that. So I don't want to comment on something that I don't know.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Rob, do you have a question? I don't know if Rob's still here. Damon? We'll go back to Rob if necessary.
Thank you. And I also want to compliment Blanca on all the work she's done, and as a representative of all the people who have done so much work as well. Just getting back to I guess getting a little bit better feel for what I think there are some aspects of what the first questioner was saying. So a warm handoff, does that mean the call comes in, 911 operator is on the phone and continues to talk to that person while connecting to St. Vincent's, and sort of introduces, so that there's three of them are on the line before she actually, you know, hands off, so that, you know, we're sure that the person hasn't hung up while waiting to be connected or something. And then afterwards, I guess this is getting to part of it as well, does the 911 operator get some feedback as to how the incident went when the St. Vincent's people picked up on it and say the mental health response unit went there, you know, so that they can develop a, you know, even better feel for whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing.
So it's the same policy as it is now. Whenever there's a 911 call, you know, the 911 operator receives feedback as to what's happened or what the situation is. I don't think that changes. I think in difference to what I think it was Terry who mentioned it is about the local police department and what happens in their role. But with the 911 operators, and again, if you call from a landline or if you call from a cell phone, it's going to send you to a different dispatcher, because there's like 43 different PSAPs throughout Westchester County. So, you know, it's a little tricky, but the 911 operator will know what's going on. I can't tell you how they know, but I know they know in terms of what the policy is and in terms of what their 911 recordings and the records, not a records management system, but whatever system that they use to communicate with the local police department.
So again, so the call comes in and does the 911 operator says, okay, we'll take care of it and I'll refer it on, or does that operator stay on and has the caller speak directly with the person at St. Vincent's?
Yeah, so either the caller speaks directly to St. Vincent's, or if heaven forbid there's something happens with the call, it gets disconnected, then the operator is calling the person back. Obviously, they have the technology for that, but at the same time calling St. Vincent's to make sure that there is an instant and immediate connection.
But so it's sort of, I don't want to say, well, I guess you can say, so what I'm getting is the 911 operator sort of hand-holding as handing over the person to St. Vincent's.
The call
You know
is
what?
transferred to the
It's
crisis
transfers.
team in
It's
St.
not like they're any three at any point in time, the three of them are on the phone together. In other words, to make sure that this person could be in a very desperate situation, that the person is not left holding,
No, they're never, no. There's never a hold. It's an immediate response. Like the operator is not going to hang up while the person's holding for somebody from the crisis team to answer the phone. There has to be connection, verbal connection between all three parties for any type of, interruption or anything to occur. They're always on the phone. If I'm understanding your question.
I guess that's sort of what you were saying, the warm handoff would be. And just
the person's never waiting for a crisis team member to answer. And again, the St. Vincent's crisis team response right now is what's working right now until the mental health response teams are fully activated, because we know obviously crises are going to happen anytime and we can't really wait for the 8 teams to fully activate before we have some sort of response going, immediate response right now.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Blanca?
Paul, before we go on to anyone else.
Blanca, I just wanted to ask. Yes.
We've actually reached the time allotted in our agenda, but I want to check with Mayo and Leroy. I mean, I think this is important. There's a lot of interest in Blanca's presentation. So I'm wondering, maybe we can give 5 or 6 more minutes if the remaining 3 people have very brief questions. Would that be okay to start around 7:20 for Mayo and Leroy?
Certainly, thank you.
Okay, so maybe please be brief and go ahead.
I just wanted to throw in a question here. Blanca, you mentioned one telephone number that ended in 5959. Is that active now? And if so, do people know about it?
I know DCMH was working on addressing that in terms of people knowing about it. I know we're using that line right now for people in general. I would have to get more information as to what their marketing efforts is. The only thing is, as we're going live with the local mental health crisis response teams, they are going to have different numbers. So we want to make sure that people don't get confused as well, but I can get back to you on that. Because there is a line for the general public. If they're in crisis right now, they can call that number. And then there is another line for EMS or police if they've come up. There's also another line.
Arlene, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I have this clear. Are you saying that you have gotten every police department in Westchester, including the state and county police, to agree that police agencies will respond to these calls, but will not insist on being in charge at the scene?
What I'm saying is that we have contracts with, right now signed with 8 different police departments that are co-locating with the mental health organizations that were selected through an RFP process to run the mental health crisis team. Each of these 8 areas, with the exception of the city of Yonkers, has an additional 4 or 5 police departments that are part of the catchment area. Right now, we're in the process of finalizing memorandum of understandings with these other departments that make up each catchment area. Right now, I cannot tell you whether they have all been signed, but they are in the process of collecting that information. Because that MOU explains the expectations and the roles of all of these entities that must work together in order for this to be successful.
Rob Wingate. Question.
Sure. I'm sorry I stepped out for just a minute there. I guess I have one, actually that answers one of my questions, because I was going to ask if the protocols for the moments of interoperability with the police departments are dependent upon the capacity of that local service organization to develop those protocols with the department, or if those protocols are developed at this county level and then implemented through uniform memorandum agreement, which it sounds like what you're getting at, that each of these sort of groupings is going to have to work within the same basic operation structures when they are working jointly with the police departments. Now, I would be interested in more information about that down the road. I guess one question I have offhand, and I have a few, but one would be, do you or does the county perceive that there is like sort of a beta test period of time on these? Like, do you perceive like testing this for 6 months or a year and then going back and sort of doing like a hot wash or a review with each of the different regions to sort of see how it's going, and then either make adjustments to the memorandum of agreement or make adjustments to the local protocols, or both? I'm sort of curious how you see quality improvement and quality adjustments taking place, because following on what Jill said, I think it'll be very interesting to see how police go about sort of relinquishing areas where they have previously had site control. And, I've had some conversations around where I live about that a little bit, where you've had officers who've been serving for 25 or 30 years. I'm sure you've talked about this already, but, and they're used to doing some kind of de-escalation, many of them. And now obviously they're being asked to step back and not to have a site control role. So I'm curious how you evaluate that over a period of initial time, if there need to be changes, because I think that's going to be an interesting balance.
Yes, you bring up a really good point, and DCMH is already looking at how to best evaluate, how to best review all of these response teams as soon as they are fully operating. We also want to make sure in terms of quality control that the response is consistent, whether you're calling or responding somewhere in Peekskill to Yonkers. It's important to focus also on the response time, because that is crucial in these types of situations. So DCMH is actually in the process of working alongside, I have to get the name of the actual organization that will be responsible for the quality control, but they are in contract with an entity that will oversee how these teams are functioning and how they're operating. Also, DCMH hired additional personnel to oversee these 8 teams to make sure that, again, they're working the same way, that they're responding to calls to address any challenges or obstacles as they are operating, and for these 8 teams to also to talk to one another, to share and identify best practices, because that is truly important. And because, moving forward, they will be expected to make a case and justify and, report back on how many calls were answered, what was the outcome, what was their average response time. So all of these things will just help make this program even better. But yes, that has been looked at, and Commissioner Orth has been extremely focused on that as well, because we want to make sure that we're investing so much money and we are addressing such an important concern that it has been identified in every local police reform report that was submitted to the state, that we want to make sure we're doing a good job on this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nada, do we have time for any more questions?
If they're just really brief, and if Blanca doesn't have time, maybe you can put your question in the chat,
Okay.
but go ahead, Keith, very briefly.
Gee,
Thank you, and thank you in regards to all the questions and answers in the meeting as well too. A lot of good questions, a lot of good answers. I just wanted to ask if there was like some type of parallel to the fire department. I know when they respond, often the police don't interfere in regards to that. You know, I've seen like, you know, sometimes the police will interfere with like the EMS and the EMT, but for the most part, when the fire department comes, you know, the fire department has the site, and you know, there's like, you know, they already have that repertoire or whatever like that with between departments and whatnot. If this was like an entity that was attached to the fire department and also the EMS, like if they had people where the calls are typically diverted in case, you know, their calls aren't being directly diverted, that they're on site, they're at the fire department, you know, they are, you know, at the hospitals, you know, in if they have to be at the station to like, you know, to stake out their you know, their lane in terms of 911 calls, you know, that might be useful as well too, as long as it's like a physical human patch, because I feel as though if they ride along and they treat it like the fire department, it'll probably be a good thing. You know what I mean? And it's not as if like, you know, the department couldn't use that, because like, I mean, sometimes they need de-escalation as well too. Like, I mean, there might be, you know, some parallels there or something.
Thank you, Keith, for the question. I think Blanca, well, it's to be determined, I guess, in a
Yeah, it's
nutshell.
to be determined, but he brings up a really good point. You know, for the police department, you're asking them to change their response culture, right? You're asking them to step back and let another team of professionals who are experienced in addressing these types of calls to respond to it. So we're going to see how they adapt and how they change and what other challenges are there down the road. But he does bring up a really good question. Thanks for your comments, Keith.
The last question is for Jill. Go ahead, Jill.
I also want to thank you for your diligence in addressing this concern in the county. I wanted to know, are the MOUs publicly available so that the public knows what's being agreed?
I'm not an attorney, so maybe I could have either Mayo or Leroy answer. However, right now, no, because they're not fully signed yet, so I can't tell you. They're not right now. They're not. But Leroy or Mayo, you could correct me.
Well, that's actually, it's a good segue to, you know, we have our next segment, which is actually featuring Leroy and Mayo, who were both the co-chairs of the Westchester County Police Reform Task Force. Julie, did you want to say anything before we invite Mayo and Leroy to present?
No, thank you. I think we're fine. And I just want to remind you that our 10-minute report at the end will probably be shorter from Shelley,
Okay.
so we have a little leeway.
Well, I wanted to give some context as to why we invited Mayo and Leroy to talk about the Office of Police Accountability for this month's meeting. And last month, we spent some time with the general members of the Westchester Coalition for Police Reform to talk about what the group would like our priorities to be in 2022. And what came up was making sure we establish civilian oversight institutions. And probably the most important one would be the Westchester County Office of Police Accountability, which is intended to be independent and have subpoena power and be quite a significant institution in terms of holding local police officers accountable. So we just wanted to check in and see where things are at, what's the timeline. And this is, as we've said before, it impacts the different villages and towns and cities in Westchester, because some of us, for example, in the city of White Plains, in our report, we mentioned that we may opt in to the Office of Police Accountability if it's established at the county level, while not while not excluding the possibility of creating a local White Plains Civilian Oversight Board that would not have the same authority as the Office of Police Accountability. So that's the context as to why we've invited Leroy and Mayo this evening. So please go ahead, whichever one would like to be first.
Well, thank you very much for having us. And, I want to thank you also for the questions that were asked regarding, regarding the Project Alliance, because one of the things we've been doing is, after we submitted the plan, we've been meeting virtually every week, working on the implementation of the recommendations. And we've been looking at best practices, not just in Westchester, New York, but we're still reviewing other models and other suggestions so that we make sure that we're doing our best to make sure that we didn't miss anything. So for instance, when we talk about hope and not handcuffs, and I think that, I think Mr. Wingate mentioned that. That's something that we certainly can go back and contemplate so that if you are in mental health crisis, you don't end up getting arrested because you had narcotics on you. So that's something we can certainly look at. With respect to the Office for Police Accountability, it's going to require action on the part of the Westchester County Board of Legislators. And some of our recommendations also will benefit greatly from statewide action. So there are recommendations that were made to our statewide delegation because we're dealing with things such as home rule, where in order to actually to punish, you have to be the hiring agency. So there are proposals that would change that, but until that's changed, we would operate under a memorandum of understanding. We would have shared services and we would allow municipalities to opt in. So I can tell you that there are a number of municipalities that have expressed an interest in opting in already, and you'd be possibly at least amazed to hear that sometimes the police officers themselves think that they would prefer to opt into a countywide Office for Police Accountability as opposed to having their matter held and heard locally, in particular when they're in a smaller community. So we've even had officers who've said, look, I'm in a department with 24 or 25 people, and how in the world do we ensure that there's a fair shake when the witness lives in town, maybe I live in town, and now we're supposed to find people out of the 1,000 or so folks who live in our community to be able to do this without fear or favor. So we would definitely make sure that it has subpoena power. We did meet with Brian Corr from NACOL, and he's the one who drafted President Obama's 21st century policing report. And when he met with us, I think at the time, to the best of his knowledge, it was us and Allegheny County in Pennsylvania that were the only two municipalities that were looking at a structure similar to the one that we have proposed. And I think that's great, but the goal is not to say that we're first. The goal is hopefully to get it right. So we're going to be looking at ways that we can ensure that there'll be open and transparent opportunity for these cases to be heard, that we won't be limited to having perhaps sometimes a body that's within the municipality that has no enforcement capabilities. And our objective will be that if there is a finding of misconduct, that finding would be made public by our board, and that then there would be recommendations that would be sent to the municipality.
Yeah, again, I join Mayo and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. And quite frankly, what we wanted to present to you tonight is more of an overview of the recommendation. As Mayo said, it is now, we made the recommendation for this body to the Board of Legislators. And so that I assume that I'm told that it will go into committee there. One of the members of the task force and one of the members of our ongoing discussions is Legislator Colin Smith, who is chairing the legislative committee there at the Board of Legislators. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that, well, he has stated that it will come within the purview of his committee so that it will be discussed. So that is the location that it will be initially discussed in then. And as you know, there's with the elections and the reappointments, there are new chairs of different committees. The good news is that Legislator Smith was chair of the Public Safety, and he's still a member of that, but and that now within the legislative committee, it can move forward to whatever extent it may dare. I have to certainly remember Damon Mayo here tonight was part of the Reimagining Task Force and worked hard on all of our recommendations as well. And the Board of Legislators as a whole was very receptive initially of the report of the task force, and additionally added recommendations to the ones, at least one or two, I think, additional recommendations to the 50 or so that we initially recommended. So I feel confident that it will get attention there at the Board of Legislators. I can't speak for them, obviously, to say how much and so forth, and how and a timeline that I can give you here tonight. And speaking of which, I wanted to state the obvious. I think in speaking to all of you, you're all so committed to police reform in the criminal justice area that I know that anything that Mayo and I say, we're preaching to the choir, so to speak, because usually when I speak to groups on a question of police reform and this climate that we're in presently, I remind people that the initial, obviously this grew out of George Floyd and the fervor that was throughout the country at that time. And I sit back and look at what's going on today, and I see all the pushback when people look at the uptick in violent crime and try to push back in a different direction. And so it's up to us, those of you here tonight, to be vigilant in our efforts to not allow total rollback in that area. The fact that this reimagining ideas came from the Governor Cuomo's executive order, and I have not, I'm not aware, as I sit here tonight, of to what extent Governor Hochul will plan to follow through on it. But I can say that, as Mayo has just said, here in Westchester, it's certainly not laying dormant. As he said, that we have been reviewing and looking at reports from not only throughout the county, but throughout the country to see what we may have missed in the task force report, and we'll continue to do so. And we'll continue to be able to have dialogue. We were so happy to see the county executive moving forward as he has with Project Alliance and in other areas in which they're doing. There will be some report later when the county executive, I'm sure, is ready to do so. I think that groups like yours, this is what we need now in order to move forward and not let things be pushed to the back burner, because I can see that that could be a possibility, and waiting on something else egregious to happen. And so we have to stay vigilant. I can tell you that you read from time to, and I think I may be going a little bit off script, but this is, while I have a soapbox, you read from time to time that you have the quote unquote progressive prosecutors pivoted and looking in different directions. And I can tell you that that is, while there may be some pivot based on people wanting concentrated efforts on violent crime now, that may be happening in some areas in terms of attention given. That was always going to be there by some of these prosecutors anyway. I know that I recently served as a transition with the district attorney in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, and people talk, there's been some discussion of the fact that he may be pivoting. He is not abandoning his everything that he ran on with moving forward on reform in a number of areas. He is, however, focusing on gun violence as everyone else is. But the fact that we're having this discussion here tonight, the fact that our group has been meeting to look at how things are being done around the country, and the fact that Westchester is still not going to let it die. I'm confident of that based on the work that we're doing.
And if I may, I just want to very briefly, I just want to mention that the proposed Office for Police Accountability came out of the working group that Kenneth Chamberlain served on. And that's the accountability working group. And Ken was pivotal. He just shared a tremendous amount of information, both here as well as with respect to, I think, a lot of the success that we have in terms of Project Alliance, which we'll continue to review. So we're talking 8 teams now. It looks like we need more. We're open to considering more. That's what it becomes. But that being said, we don't have a framework in it right now that I can specifically speak to you about, but I can share that we discussed several protocols, one of which was to have a liaison with the district attorney's office. And that would allow the Office for Police Accountability to make referrals directly to the DA's office if they thought there was criminality involved in the conduct of the officers. So that's just one of the things we're going to be looking at, but there's a lot that we'll have to look at. I think at this stage, it would be a bit irresponsible to go too much more into any specifics because we haven't agreed on them. But there are a number of things to that point. There are other recommendations which we've made to the state, such as precluding officers who've been found guilty of misconduct from leaving one police department and joining another, and also a proposal that officers have to have a license to maintain their employment. So if an officer was found no longer capable of maintaining that license, not unlike a plumber, a teacher, a nurse, lawyer, that person wouldn't be able to serve as a police officer because they would lose that fundamental asset of having a license, which would not allow them to continue to work. Some of these suggestions had to go to the state, though, because they were not things that could be enforced locally.
A very, very helpful presentation. Thank you both. So just so that we're all clear about the process now, Legislator Colin Smith is not discussing this in the Public Safety Committee of the Westchester County Board of Legislators because the final sort of authorizing legislation is not in his hand. So he's waiting for that until he brings it to the Public Safety Committee, and then it hopefully will get out of the Public Safety Committee and go to the full Board of Legislators for a vote. Did I summarize the process and where we're at right now?
Well, I think that's correct. I would just point out that you mentioned the Public Safety Committee. If in fact it's to move forward, that has to be legislation, and he's now chair of the Legislation Committee. I think it would have to go through that committee before it will go before the full board.
It would go through both.
Both. Okay, thank you.
Probably, like everything else, if there's money involved, maybe even the budget.
Finance, yeah.
Everybody's,
So is the committee or the board waiting for the final version of the authorizing legislation to come out of the County Police Reform Task Force? Is that what's happening now?
No, I think that when we made the recommendations, we listed some of the things that we were concerned that we really wanted to see in there, but in terms of the weeds and the actual, there's all the moving parts, just in consultation with Legislator Smith and Mayor, we know that working through that is something that that is the job of the Board of Legislators within that committee, because we may suggest one thing that may have effects on something else entirely, but it's their job to put it all together. Just to be clear, in our recommendation, we listed certain things such as that officers would be able to make that the public and other law enforcement officers will be able to make anonymous complaints, that it would be funded and operated independent of all branches of government, that they would have subpoena power and laws establishing it, that there would be open for shared service agreements with municipalities throughout the county. These were some of the things that we listed within our recommendation, but all of this is to be put into the pod and look, and they would look down in the weeds and address all the issues and concerns that come out of that.
So for us to sort of facilitate and hopefully accelerate this process, we should most likely be directly in touch with members of the Public Safety Committee at the Westchester County Board of Legislators. Would that be a helpful role for us, all of us to play?
Yeah,
I
I see.
think at this stage,
Go ahead.
we're already scheduling times to meet and you know, Leroy and I will be working with them also as they structure this along with the Department of Law. So it'll be several people looking at it. The other thing is that there are a lot of details, simply how do we comprise the board? How many members are there going to be? What are the terms? You know, are we going to stagger the terms? We're going to have 3 terms. How can you be removed? I mean, are you removed for cause? And is that going to be based on a simple majority vote, or is there something else? So all of these things we have to look at. And then ultimately also as a shared services agreement, as Damon said, you know, we're going to be looking possibly also at what is the funding, you know, to what degree is there going to be a shared funding based on municipalities being able to opt in? And ultimately, we're pretty comfortable that under shared services, it'll be a savings for for each municipality, because no one municipality has to now bear the burden of the cost. The other positive is that, to go back to what that officer had said, is look, you're not going to now be limited to having somebody from your municipality or from your geographic location. So if the incident occurred in Peekskill, maybe the people that are hearing your case are from the Sound Shore area and they're independent. You don't have to worry about conflict. So it gives us so many more options in terms of having a process that people can believe in. And that would be for the community as well as for the police.
Right, thank you very much. And Arlene has asked about whose responsibility is it to draft the actual proposed legislation. If I understood correctly, Arlene, it's the Board of Legislators.
It is the Board of Legislators. We do have a proposed draft that was submitted already as well. That's in our report for the county, but it's the Board of Legislators.
Right.
Certainly the actual first drafts, so to speak, would be the county attorney's office generally. And we're talking about legislation to come before us to get all the whys and whereases correct, and to review the law to make sure it's not going to be that it can't be well, anything can be challenged in the courts, but it can't be meritoriously challenged in the courts, because you know you have to anticipate that's going to happen.
And it's my understanding that they are already beginning the work.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Kathy?
I'm just wondering, is there, in terms of the legislation and the administrative details about that are going into specifying what we're looking for in a board, is there something that we and the public should be watching for? Elements that we think are key, that must be included for this to be meaningful? And is there anything that we should be paying attention to and making our communities aware of?
I would think that the funding is going to be essential to make sure that it's always properly and fully funded so that it can function as it's intended to, that it has subpoena power, that it's independent, that it doesn't answer directly to the county executive or to the county board of legislators. And those are all things that are in our recommendations. So if we're able to do that, I think that those are the primary things that I would look for, because many purported, at least, civilian complaint review boards either don't have subpoena power or they're lacking in another way, or there's no independence. So all the people are directly appointed by someone very close to the police department.
And the money thing, you have to watch year to year, as it develops, and certainly, if there were an administration change or anything like that, and it has to continue to have the support of the activists and the people as well. And, that means, doing the job well and publicizing that it's there and what its function is.
And to David's point, if it works well, a community that has a well-functioning body such as this is much less likely to have problems, because it's something people can believe in. So people will give it an opportunity to do the work that's supposed to be done. And so if it's properly funded, if we're able to get individuals that are there, that are interested in doing the work, and of course it's going to be a lot of work, Right now, the question is going to be how many cases do we anticipate, which is very difficult to even be able to determine. But making sure that it's properly staffed so that let's assume if we anticipate having 50 cases and we end up with 250 cases, do we have enough people who will be able to honestly administer justice to 250 cases? And are we able to make sure that we keep complainants in the loop about the status of the case? You know, so we don't want to have people who don't hear anything else about the case after a case has been filed and later they find out that it's unfounded. So as the district attorney's office is supposed to do the same thing, they're supposed to let people know the status of the case. So we want to make sure that that's certainly an element so that the transparency component is there.
Well, this has been a really very helpful presentation from all three of you. We're very grateful that you all took the time, Blanca, Leroy, and Mayo. We'll certainly be in close touch with you as things move forward, both for Project Alliance and the Office of Police Accountability. So on behalf of all of us, I thank you very much for being here with us this evening. We just have two other brief items. Yeah, thank you. I see some people clapping. You can clap for them. That's fine.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
We're limited by Zoom, but we can still clap, I guess, with Zoom, right? The next is Shelley's going to give a brief update about, we have plans. The other thing that happened last month is people were asking about having a training in Westchester County on implicit bias, but one that is combined with law enforcement, because really, what the expert trainers are saying when they do implicit bias trainings is that it should be blended. It shouldn't just be all law enforcement officers doing a training together, but it should be like 50% civilian, those who are most impacted, and 50%. But I don't think there's a single example in the county of Westchester where law enforcement has engaged in implicit bias training with members of the public, and especially with members of the public who have a history of being most impacted by policing. So Shelley, go ahead.
Yes, so one of the things that we're considering is trying to find an expert or experts who can assist us with this training that could be effective for both of those groups. So that's one thought that's going into this. When specifically, where specifically, how many people, what specifically we will focus on, because many of the departments themselves, as we have found out through the police reform, is that a lot of them have already undertaken or plan to undertake implicit bias training. So have they done that already? And if so, can we focus on something that's going to not be repetitive for them? One other possibility of area would be de-escalation type training, or can those work together, or would that be a better topic to be focusing on? So there are many questions and ideas and thoughts, and now the question is, I had tried to reach out to somebody that I had seen do a training who I thought was really fabulous, but was unable to get them to agree to do it. So we're still working on trying to find people to do that. We're also asking different people and organizations if that would be something that would even be possible. Would police departments be willing to join in with us on this kind of an endeavor? So there are a lot of questions, not many answers right now as far as what the focus is going to be and who's going to be included, but we are working on trying to pull that together.
Yeah, and the steering committee really thanks Shelley, who is now a member of the steering committee, for really taking the initiative on this, because there are a lot of details to work out, and hopefully next month we'll have more to report. Jill.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why you're focusing on implicit bias and not more structural racism. I think that the police get implicit bias training. Like that's a requirement. And I think what's missing is a understanding of the structural violence in our, the structural racism, and which I think is also violence, but in the society. And I would really highly recommend the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. We've definitely at WCPR, we've definitely reached out and we've tried hard in the past 10 years. The issue is that for professional development training for law enforcement, they have, I think they have anywhere from 20 to 40 hours a year for training. And most of the police leaders in Westchester, if not all of them, think that the training should be very specific to the profession of law enforcement. So the People's Institute 2.5-day training, you know, it's very challenging for us to get a commitment from a local police department to send officers to the training. We have asked, and we haven't yet had success in Westchester with that, so.
Nada, if I may, one of the things that we addressed in the task force for the county was intercultural competency and looking at the training that exists right now. And I think we have a very good and honest broker in Lieutenant Alonji, who runs the police academy. And he suggested that he could find a significant amount of additional time for training. I don't have my notes with respect to that with me, but if I'm not mistaken, he was talking about adding more than a week, maybe 2 weeks of training specifically dealing with this, and quote unquote said, you know, right now we're giving all this training on arson, and the reality is that 99.9% of them are never going to address an arson, but they could benefit from this training. And he seemed to be, as far as I could tell, excited about the prospect. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to include that. So if you want to send that information to me, along with you know, the other information, I saw that Keith, you suggested you were talking about the Hippocratic Oath, and that's something I believe 100% in, that, you know, we ought to have an oath. The goal should be to do no harm, unless you absolutely have to. And we were talking about hope and not handcuffs. All of those things still are going toward us and analyzing best practices. So if you have anything along those lines that we didn't touch upon that you think would be positive and that should be included in the county, send it to me. And we will debate it and we'll look at ways we can include it. And even if it's not included right now, we don't view this as being finished because we hit a particular date. We're going to be revisiting all of this and looking at whether we have enough you know, mobile crisis teams. Do we have enough municipalities? Is the uniform training the way that it needs to be? So I think that there's a conversation that can be had in terms of maybe having those providers in the academy. There were already suggestions about who could do it, but I don't think that there's any determination about who would be providing those services thus far. And that's for the county. Our goal would be for the county to be the hub that all of the other municipalities can use, because as most of you, if not all of you know, only 50% of our departments in Westchester County are accredited, and 25% statewide. So we want to make sure we have as much uniformity as possible.
Thank you, Mayo. And I see Rob has his hand up, but just to answer briefly, sort of going back to Jill and to you as well, we don't know. I don't think any civilian knows what exactly the implicit bias training is at the police academy in Westchester County. So NACOL did provide a trainer, one of the leading people in implicit bias, and her explicit recommendation was that if law enforcement departments are doing implicit bias, which is unconscious bias, which is extremely important for officers to be aware that everyone, include all of us, everyone has implicit unconscious bias. The best is for them to mix, not just to have law enforcement in the room, but to mix 50% with civilians. That's not happening at the police academy. And so it's very interesting. That could be a proposal. When the police are being trained in implicit bias, let them do the training with members of the community, because part of the training will be that members of the community learn about their unconscious bias as well, about law enforcement, etc. So, and how that plays out in interactions with police and community. So anyway, so that's a proposal we can certainly send to Mayo. Rob.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far because I know it's busy, getting late, but it did occur to me, I tend to reiterate a little bit the statement that was made earlier about a desire for some or at least a significant portion of this kind of training to be looking at structural racism and not just an implicit bias. And I've actually managed some implicit bias trainings with health faculty in the healthcare side of the equation, and I think they could be fantastic. One of the reasons I tend to think in this setting that looking at structural issues on a training basis can be equally, if not more significant, and this gets really touchy, but is also perhaps that when we're thinking about training formats and who the audience might be, if we're saying we're going to train every officer in the county, well, I think there is a reality that it may be a small number, but there will nonetheless be some officers or leaders or employees of different forces who may have been part of court cases that relate to civil rights and that relate to procedures underway, right, or protocols for managing or redesigning or having disciplinary action as a result of civil rights actions or lack thereof. Certainly the one I know is Sleepy Hollow. And obviously we also know the district attorney has been, and the federal government, looking at Mount Vernon. And so there are some other situations like this where there might be individual police officers or employees or supervisors for whom having them in that room would be very interesting, needless to say, and very valuable. But on a training basis, we might also have to take into account that to reach those individuals and everybody who might be associated with those kinds of cases or judicial procedures underway, that might need to be taken into account in how the trainings themselves are developed or how the audiences are formed. So that might seem like sort of a small point because it might be a small number of individuals, but by the same token, there will be people in those rooms who know of those situations. Again, Sleepy Hollow, everybody knows the civil rights case that got decided 2 years ago in Sleepy Hollow, and still hangs over the entire, as far as I'm concerned, still hangs over the entire force. So conducting a training on any of these topics with departments that have active civil rights cases or recently decided civil rights cases is going to change, to my way of thinking, would right there have an impact on the outcomes of any kind of training. And therefore, to my way of thinking, in planning the training, that kind of, there might even need to be some advanced research on, what departments have experienced that or are under mandates to act differently as a result of those kinds of decisions. Now, not to overplay that, because ideally that shouldn't be, maybe that shouldn't be a part of training development, and but maybe that should be an intentional decision too, right? Like maybe that should not be a part of how the trainings are developed, but to be aware that for the people in that room, some of the content of that training are going to be bringing to their mind judicial realities, and so I don't know what that volume of forces and officers would be. But in the areas I live, it would not be insubstantial. And so, at least to my way of thinking. So I don't offer a solution to that or know where that would go, but I think it's a dynamic to be aware of.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that. It's 7:59. We like to close promptly at 8. So Keith, just very briefly, please.
Just to reiterate, in terms of the bias of the team spending a lot of time at the police station or amongst police, and a part of their rotation to have attached days at the firehouse, the hospitals, and the 911 operator pit, as well as the police stations. Just to reiterate that, that's all I wanted to do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. We, at the last point in the agenda is any upcoming events. Julie, did you or anyone else have anything that's relevant to the police accountability community before we close?
I don't.
Nada, may I talk about a meeting coming up?
Sure, please go ahead, Lena.
Hi, everyone. The NAACP is meeting on Monday, and we have asked that you look at the film, The Long Shadow, which deals with white supremacy. The developer of that film, Frances Kelsey, is our guest, and we are emulating a chat she had with Lane Cobb on Talk Race. So I think one of the things that's often missing is we tread very lightly on discussions of race. And I would appreciate it if you all would go forth, watch The Long Shadow. You can see it on YouTube, or if you check the NAACP White Plains Greenberg Facebook page, there's a link there. But it's very easy to access. It's a 90-minute film. You can watch it in smidgets between now and then, but we're asking you to watch it in advance so that we come to that meeting with some real probing questions for Frances Cowsey, a Southern belle, who came up with this wonderful film. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, Lena. And if you, or maybe if we can find it on, somehow I've dropped off the mailing list for the the email list for the NAACP, but this is something that we would be happy to share with the WCPR email lists. Lynn.
Well, I just want to mention that the Greenberg Human Rights Advisory Committee is having a town hall discussion on racism and how it's experienced by Black residents in Greenberg. And we're doing this on Saturday on Zoom from 3 to 5 p.m. Through a link that the Greenberg Public Library has set up for us. We have, it's mostly, we only have 20 spots left out of 100. And
Wow.
If you're a Greenberg resident and you want to hear about an honest discussion on racism and the Black experience in Greenberg, sign up. It's a participatory conversation moderated by AJ Woodson and Tasha Young, and it should be really interesting. So, and it will be taped and it will be live streamed on the Greenberg Public Library Facebook page. It's on Saturday, 3 to 5 p.m. So you can watch it live stream on the Greenberg Public Library Facebook page. I will get a tape and we'll be able to share the tape as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. And there are people here interested in both the NAACP and the Greenberg Human Rights. If you could please send it to either me or Julie, maybe perhaps Julie, and we will make sure we send it out to the WCPR lists.
I have it somewhere, Lynn, but if it's easy for you to forward to me again, I would appreciate it very much.
Wonderful. All right. Well, good meeting, everyone. Our next general meeting will be March
24th.
March 24th. So I wish everyone a very good month until March 24th, and many of you we will see before then.
Thanks for
Thank
a
you.
great meeting, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Great.
Wonderful guests, great information.
Yeah. And Nada, thank you. And Paul, thank you. And Mayo, and I don't know if our other guests are still here, but.
Gail, you have your hand up or you're just waving? She's just waving? You're muted. You're on mute.
Right on. The Long Shadow movie, is that on World War I or like?
No.
I just looked it up real
Because
quick.
there are several named The Long Shadow. This
Right, I
is
saw that.
on white supremacy, and the key is the director, Frances Cowsey. So you should see that name associated with it.
Frances
Cowsey, C-A-U-S-E-Y.
C-A-U.
Good, Bettina. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Bettina. Did she leave already?
And Nada, can Blanca send us the list of the 8 municipalities and the support?
And I'll get that out. Are you on the WCPR email list?
I am. And I
Okay.
was trying to take copious notes, but there was just so much information. So if she could send that, that would be beautiful.
Yeah, I'll make sure we get that out.
Thank
Either myself or Julie will send it to everyone. Great. All right, everybody. Have a good evening.
All right, good night, you guys.
You're
Night.
welcome.
Made this
Bye-bye.
one.